Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff, and as I've been filming the iPhone X review, this has popped up on my doorstep. This is the Razer phone. This is Razer's very first phone, so I'm really excited to unbox it and just take a look at it, give some impressions. So let's just jump right into it. So I've got no knife today. I don't know where I put it, but I've got a SIM ejection tool. That works, right? So we're just going to peel off the plastic. This is indeed brand new. Now there's something that I want to mention with this phone as far as my understanding goes and who it's for. This is not a gaming phone. So I mean that it doesn't have more power than other flagships that are out on the market, but it is a phone that's made for gamers. So those who really care about performance, the best that they can get out of their hardware, and who like control over adjusting whatever they can. It's a mindset, and it's for those people. So let's go ahead and open the box. Ooh, fancy schmancy. What's this? Whether you're watching movies in bed, listening to music on your run, or kicking virtual ass on your commute, you need a device that delivers breathtaking visual cinematic audio and the power to last all day. So that's a nice little letter there. Tossing that aside, here is the phone. And boy, wow, very first impression is that this has got some heft to it. So let's go ahead and pull this wrapping up. Oh yeah. All right. It's got a nice cool metal feel to it. It's got a nice matte finish to it. I like that embossed logo. I've seen that there are some limited edition ones that are green. That feels really nice in the hand and looks a lot like the Next Bit Robin did, which is not surprising considering this thing's origins. This phone feels really nice and sturdy, and I do not mind this boxiness. All of the phones that are coming out these days have glass on the back. Really, not many of them are metal these days, which is why I like the OnePlus 5T and the OnePlus 5. I still like metal phones. Now, spec-wise, this thing is a beast. It's got a 4,000 milliamp hour battery inside of it. We've got a 5.7-inch display. It is a 16:9 aspect. And I'm actually pretty happy to have a native 16:9 aspect for media watching. It's got Quad HD resolution, 515 pixels per inch. We have the Snapdragon 835 SoC inside of this thing. We've got 8 gigabytes of RAM. It's got 64 gigabytes of internal storage, but we do have an SD card slot, which should be paired with the SIM card. We've got Qualcomm Quick Charge 4.0. Yes, you can see down here at the bottom that there is no headphone jack, although in the box, let's go ahead and see what else is in this box. There is a dongle in here. Ooh, that's really nice. Nice and textured everywhere. So we've got some documentation. And right here they have the SIM ejection tool for you. Indeed, they show you that the SIM card and the micro SD card are in the same spot. Quick start guide right here tells you about the phone. Ooh, they give you stickers. How Apple of them. Go ahead and see what's in here. So here's the dongle that I told you about. And look at that. It's got a braided cable on it. That's really nice, so I don't have to worry about it getting all tangled up. And we've got the USB-C cable right here. And that's braided too. Wow, this is a really nice package. I don't have a braided cable. And lastly, here we have the power brick. And there we go. This is a really nice unboxing experience. I really wasn't expecting that. Now that I've made a huge mess, let's put this aside and continue talking about some specifications. So on the front, we've got an 8 megapixel camera. We have an ambient light sensor, proximity sensor. You can see right here, we've got speakers, stereo speakers. I really want to check these out. I hear that they are loud and fantastic. And compared to a lot of other speakers on smartphones out on the market right now, that's a nice change. Taking a look at the left-hand side, we've got the volume buttons. At the right, we've got the power button that also is paired with the fingerprint sensor. And I've heard some varied things about how people feel about the fingerprint sensor. At the top here, it looks like we have a microphone. At the bottom, another microphone, the USB-C charging port. Then at the back, we've got a flash. It looks like a dual LED flash and two 12 megapixel cameras at 2 different focal lengths. So we've got the standard camera and a telephoto camera. So it's that 2 times optical zoom that we've been used to seeing out on the market these days. So let's turn this thing on. Now I've heard that this doesn't have the brightest of displays, but I've heard that it's well calibrated, so I really want to test that out for myself, as that's important. So some big things that we are hearing about this display is that it's got a variable refresh rate, which means that the display refresh is in sync with the GPU. So this should avoid stutters and lagging. And the display refresh rate supports up to 120 Hz or a potential of 120 frames per second in apps that support it. Let's get her all set up, get started. We're going to start as a new phone. We'll get this set up. All right, so everything is set up, and actually this is 24 hours later. After I set this up, I couldn't help myself. I had to go and play with it and just see what this is all about as a phone. And right now I need to say that they're going to be sending me another one because this one's been a little bit finicky, and we're not exactly sure why. It's just been in regards to frame rates. So first impressions with the display off is that this is an awesome phone. I just really like the way that this looks. I like the way that it feels. It's very industrial. It feels like I could toss it onto the ground like a rock and nothing will happen to it. If anything, it'll break pavement. That's just to say that it feels very solid and very well built. I do notice that the speakers have just these little plastic strips over them, and I can see that one of them is not completely flush. So that's a little bit of a complaint that I have. Hopefully on the new unit that comes, it'll be a little bit better. Another thing that I notice is that because this is metal, and because they are relying on the metal to also pull heat away from the SoC, this phone gets pretty hot. So if you're doing gaming for a prolonged period of time, some intensive gaming, it does feel quite warm. Doing everyday tasks, if you're doing it long enough, feels warm too. But that's to be expected with a metal phone like this. Now, I like this matte finish in the metal, but it does hold on to my fingerprints, and it's not the easiest to wipe off. There isn't any water resistance to speak of, so I can't just rinse it to help myself. But you can wipe it clean. That's just a minor gripe. Now, some people have been complaining about the placement of the fingerprint sensor, and I have to admit that it's a little bit low. I'm often expecting it to be about right here, and it's a little lower than that. But it's very accurate and very fast. As soon as you place your finger on it, hold it down, turn it on, it unlocks it all at the same time. I've also been finding the volume buttons to be a little bit lower than I would like them to be. I don't think that would matter really, except for this gets to be pretty toasty when you're gaming, so I decided to get out my Moga controller, and you can see where those buttons are located. So when I slip this into the Moga controller, I can no longer access my volume buttons. So that's just something I noticed last night when I was playing with this. So now looking at this display a little bit, I have yet to measure it, and I will. Colors look pretty good to me. It's not overly too cool to my eyes. I do notice that yes, this doesn't get extremely bright. It gets bright enough. I think that if you're indoors playing games, it's going to be just fine. I think if you're indoors in general, it'll be just fine. The only time I think that it's not going to get bright enough is when you're outdoors. So yes, I can totally see that this will not be an easy phone to see when you're out in direct sunlight. For that, you're going to want one of the other phones that gets pretty bright, like 700 nit brightness phones. Is it a deal breaker? No, I live in Washington. The sun never shines here. So I think it depends on your usage scenario, but it really honestly does not bother me. And I'm picky. So how about that feature that everybody cares most about, the 120 Hz display? So if you go underneath display settings here, you see there's an option for refresh rate. By default, it's 90 Hz out of the box. 60 Hz, that's just like any other Android display. But when it's at 120 Hz, it is really nice and smooth. It's a thing of beauty. Now I'm filming at 60 frames per second, so hopefully we can see a little bit better than if I was filming at 30 frames per second. So the UI looks nice and smooth. Scrolling is nice and smooth. Even in applications, we can see that scrolling looks pretty nice and smooth. It certainly looks a lot better than some of the Android experiences that we have. Samsung, for example. But where it really shines is in games that support really high frame rates, and there's really not that many games right now. That when you do play them at 120 Hz, and they are approaching at least a frame rate of 100 frames per second, it looks pretty darn nice, pretty darn smooth. Now, I would say that games that really aren't compatible with a higher frame rate, I would just change the display to 60 Hz. That way you get the best result. Otherwise, you notice it looks pretty stuttery. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the gaming and performance experience until I get my new unit. That way I can make sure that any of the things I have experienced are not a defect or some weird thing going on. So I think that really, right now, 120 hertz looks nice for scrolling. It just gives it a more of a responsive feel. But most of the time, I'm probably going to keep it at 60 hertz. What's also nice is that you can control the display resolution as well. You see that you have it at 1440p. Touch it, give it a second. It has 1080p as well. And then again, we've got 720p. What's pretty cool is that they offer a setting that's called Game Booster. So it tells you Game Booster allows you to individually optimize your games to extend battery life and improve your phone's performance for a better gaming experience. So you've got presets and then you can customize them. Oh, and this right here, this is just my little frame counter. You can turn this on underneath developer options. That way you can see how the games are performing. So I've got a couple of games installed and it's already recognized these itself. You can add games if it didn't recognize them. You can also add other apps too so that you can control how those are performing. So that's a nice touch. So with the presets, you can optimize between battery and performance. I also really like that there is a do not disturb mode for games. So anytime you go into a particular game, you won't get notifications. It's not going to knock you out of it. So if I tap on just say Real Racing to configure it, I can add a custom configuration and I can choose the CPU frequency. So if I want it to be at the max, we can get everything to be at the max, 1440p. We can change the frame rates all the way up to 120 frames per second. You can choose anti-aliasing should you want. Let's save it. Now anytime I run this, it's going to run at max settings. Now of course, the phone is going to get very hot that way and it's going to throttle sooner. But should you want to beef it at full settings, you can definitely do that. One thing that I really appreciate is that this is pretty close to stock Android. It really has that stock Android feel. We have Nova Launcher Prime on here. Usually you have to go to the Google Play Store and pay for the Prime version, but it comes here by default. This is the default launcher. And this is actually the launcher that I use all the time. So I was able to go underneath settings, and I was able to go to backup and import settings, and I restored the way that I usually have my desktop. I also really love that Nova Launcher supports gestures, so just swipe upward, you can now get to the app drawer, swipe downward, and you get to see what's going on with your notifications, and also with your controls. Another nice thing is that they do not fill up this phone with bloatware. It did come with a couple of games, but from what they told me, this is for the press only, and this should not be on retail models. And anyway, I can easily delete them. It just helps me find which games support a higher frame rate. I do like that we've got a theme store. That way you can customize the way that your device looks. I like this one, for example, Razer Smokehouse. And of course with Nova Launcher you can do a lot of customization as well. I haven't downloaded them yet, but I usually put pixel icons. The last thing that I want to mention in this impressions and before I get my second phone, the speakers on this device are awesome. It is what everybody says it is. They get really nice and loud. I don't hear any distortion. These are probably the best speakers that I've heard on any of the smartphones this year. They are the best speakers that I've heard this year. You've also got some presets. These are some Dolby presets, movie, music, game, voice, and you can add some custom presets yourself. So my thoughts here is that I can really see what they're going for. They want this to be the all-out Android experience. I really can't speak much for battery life yet, but of course, if you want to get the best battery life out of this thing, keep it down at lower settings, lower refresh rate. But this does have a really nice screen on it. I think that it gets bright enough for most media situations. The refresh rate is awesome. It's really nice to see Android being this smooth. I have been seeing some frame rate issues here and there, but I am getting another unit. So I'll see what I think for my full review. So this has been Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Ask your questions. I really want to test this and see just how well it performs, especially in comparison to the other flagship devices out there. So ask your questions. Have a good night, you guys. Bye!